I'm Frank Vaughn. It's October 1st, 2024, and right now, at this hour, your social media influencers and those who are out there farming clicks and likes have assured you that World War III has begun because Iran has rained some missiles down upon the state of Israel. They take for granted that your memory is short and you don't remember that a missile attack has already occurred in this year and did not lead to direct armed conflict between Iran and Israel, and they take for granted that you don't remember that when President Trump hit General Soleimani on Iraqi soil, wider war did not erupt at that point either. Now, the Biden-Harris administration has a keen interest in Iran. They're the ones that lifted sanctions. They're the one that sent billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to Iran, which has helped them. Some of that money has helped them to develop Hezbollah, to develop their opposition to Israel in what I would term the Israeli-Iranian Cold War in the Middle East. Now, you could argue that it is a hot war now because it is raging on multiple fronts, but there are rules. It is a proxy war. It is very hard for Iran to invade Israel. Dare I say it's impossible with the kind of navy that they have, if you can even call it a navy. Likewise, it's extremely difficult for Israel, fighting in the wars that it is fighting in right now, to invade Iran directly and deign to occupy it. The Americans, on the other hand, in order for them to start dropping bombs upon Iran, which, by the way, this thesis that I'm presenting to you would be invalidated by American bombs dropping on Iranian soil. It would also be invalidated, I would argue, by a large-scale aerial response involving warplanes and not just missiles on the part of Israel on Iranian soil. There is no way for Israel to win a direct confrontation with Iran. I don't even think nuclear weapons could defeat what it is Israel is fighting, not just with the Iranians, but with all of their enemies around the Middle East. The Biden-Harris administration would have to, technically speaking anyway, go to Congress to get an authorization to go to war directly with Iran. Now, there is a history of U.S. presidents bypassing Congress to create a war effort. But this is a little different because there is no history of direct conflict between Iran and the United States. Plus, you have to take into consideration the fact that the Biden-Harris administration lifted sanctions on Iran, provided them with hundreds of billions of dollars, and have what you would call a pecuniary interest in avoiding conflict. Now, all that being said, the mismanagement of foreign policy by the Biden administration is the subject of a completely other video. But what I seek to do here is offer people maybe a checklist that would inform them as to whether or not their cortisol levels should shoot through the roof with stress versus what appears to me to be a highly coordinated game of optics. The Iranians need to look like they're doing something without actually doing anything directly. The regime in Iran, like any regime, does not seek its own end. So it is very difficult for me to conceive how they would want to wage a direct military conflict, escalating things beyond the scope of the rules that appear to already be in play. When there is no benefit, there's no hope of gain. It would be the end of their Persian civilization. I call it Persian because the Persian people, well, that's a whole other subject. The Islamic Republic versus the underlying Persian culture. But again, I don't want to get lost in the weeds here. I'm trying to provide some reassurance for people. They have to appear like they're doing something to help them maintain their grip on the Iranian people, who are, by and large, very angry, to put it mildly, with the Jewish state. Now, as to the framework of the current conflict, I have no idea how you cut that Gordian knot. And this goes back to what I was saying in a previous video about understanding perspectives of competing interests in conflict. To the Israelis, they are fighting a war of survival. Maybe a preventative war, maybe an offensive war, but in their mind, everything they're doing is defensive because they are surrounded, not just by governments, but by peoples who, if they could, would kill every last Jewish man, woman, and child. In the words of Canada's own Jeremy Mackenzie, which you can see on Ezra Levent's Twitter page, where he expresses his hope that Hezbollah would just march all the way through Israel and kill every last person there. From river to the sea is a genocidal call to action. The fact of the matter is, every public opinion survey that we have, every poll of Arab populations around the Middle East show that a plurality, a majority, of the Arab public mind would see the state of Israel completely destroyed and eliminated from the planet. And if they could, if the borders of Israel fell, if the Israeli military was no longer there, they would swarm the state and kill everybody in it. And that's just an observable fact, and you can argue, you can try and argue it, but there it is. On the flip side, the Israeli state, now I might have this a bit off, I'm going from memory here, but has a population that's roughly a third Arab. They enjoy rights as citizens in Israel. They have political representation. They vote in elections, and they exist side by side with their so-called Jewish masters, however you want to term it. There are no Jewish political parties in any of the Arab states. There's no major Jewish populations in any of the Arab states. Israel is whether you agree with their collective democratic will, is a functional democracy. It looks like, when this is all said and done, that Netanyahu is going to pay a very stiff political penalty for the conflict that is now raging. At least half of Israel disagrees in some form with his handling. And it is a very small segment, and this is important. It is a sliver of the Israeli population that feels the same way about Arabs that the majority of the Arab population feels about the Israeli population. Those who vote far right, those who vote for extreme Zionism in the greater Israel, present a very small share of the Israeli polity. The other thing to take into consideration is the change that has been observed in Lebanon over the last 80 years. Once a majority Christian country, the interests of Iran, served through Hezbollah and other factors, have reduced that Christian population now to likely below a third. Beirut used to be known as the Paris of the Middle East, but sadly no longer. The politics of the region is a mess. Hezbollah, Hamas, and many iterations of those same forces, back through history and time, have sought one thing, and that is the destruction of Israel and the destruction of the Jewish people. There have been several wars in the Middle East since Israel was founded, and each war was a war of genocide, a war of destruction. The expressed objectives of the invading armies was to completely annihilate Israel as a state and to destroy the Jewish people. In Israel's mind, they are fighting defensive wars. Now, people say that the Jews, the Zionists, they completely run the United States. Who am I to say if that's true or not? I don't believe it to be so. I don't understand how the same people who say the Jews run everything can also say that China runs everything, that can also say that Russia runs everything. It seems like there's a whole pile of people running the United States, none of them are American, and depending on the mood of the public who are talking about it, it could be any ethnicity or nationality, depending on the individual's particular politics. But is it a stretch to just see U.S. involvement in Israel as an appendage of the empires needs. Israel's a toehold in the Middle East. They're a very powerful little nation. They punch way above their weight class. They have a world-class air force. They have nuclear weapons. And they have probably the world's keenest intelligence agency on the planet. I don't know if there's any better than Mossad. They are, whether you agree with what they're doing or not, they work magic. And it might be in U.S. interests to maintain good relations and to make sure that Israel remains strong. I'm not sure you need a global Jewish conspiracy to understand why that might be the situation. I think it's beyond the scope of anybody watching this, including the man filming it, to propose a solution to such a complicated mess, or to sit in judgment. I think what we should do is tone down the fear-mongering. It makes me sick to my stomach. The instant something happens over there, to see so many people declaring the end of the world because it gets views and it gets likes and it gets shares and retweets, these proclamations that the world is ending today. When, from what I've seen so far, this is the same sort of optical theater war that we've been observing for years. And there is another side to the coin, too. Was Hamas, for instance, as one example, was Hamas helped and created and funded by the Israeli intelligence community as a way to counter the Palestinian Liberation Organization decades ago? Quite possibly. The Mujahideen was funded and largely created by U.S. foreign policy as a means to bog down the Russian army, cost them time, resources, money, and lives in Afghanistan, and make sure that they could not win the unwinnable war. It was actually a very important plank of the victorious U.S. foreign policy because it broke the back of the Russian army in this mountainous country that nobody seems to be able to rule except the people who live there. And the Mujahideen, of course, spawned al-Qaeda and spawned the entire narrative of the last 20 years. So you could say that the United States created that problem. The thing about creating forces to combat other forces, when you unleash the genie out of the box, it's really hard to put it back in. There's the law of unintended consequences, and they cascade those unintended consequences all the way down through history. But what I think in this moment is that everybody should just take a breath. Until certain things happen in the Middle East involving direct conflict between U.S. armed forces and Iran, and when I say direct, you know you have the Houthis that are funded by Iran, firing missiles at commercial ships on the Red Sea and disrupting global crime. This is all part of the proxy war. This is all part of the way that the conflict, the Cold War, manifests itself in the region. And it's not to say that it's not dangerous. You know, we're playing with fire. We're playing with fire there. We're playing with fire in Ukraine. And things can spiral out of control at any moment. Such is the way it is. The people who were alive to see World War I start, I recall very vividly reading an account of a man. He took flight out of Britain. He flew into somewhere into Africa. I don't remember where. Somewhere in Central Africa. He was there for 2 weeks. And when he came home, he was shocked to learn that the entire world had descended into war. And it wasn't because the Germans invaded somebody. It wasn't because of global powers going to war with each other directly. It was because two small nations declared war on each other, and there was a cascading effect of alliances and mobilization orders, which were at the time, and it was impossible. If you issued a mobilization order, My screen turned off yet again. If you issued a mobilization order, you couldn't pull it back. Things just started to move and they were out of your control, even as a political leader. And all of a sudden, the world found itself in World War I, and everybody thought it was going to end quick, and instead, millions of lives were fruitlessly lost. An age of revolution, or a mini age, I shouldn't say an age of revolution, but a period of revolution and darkness and depression and starvation and stagnation occurred in the wake of that World War. The Treaty of Versailles, which was overly punitive and absolutely devastated Germany, sowed the seeds that led to the rise of the National Socialists and the subsequent Second World War. The law of unintended consequences, the law of momentum, took a toll on the world. So I'm not actually saying that couldn't happen here. But I think everybody that's really worried right now should just take a breath. As I said at the beginning, American bombs falling on Iranian territory, a massive Israeli airstrike involving planes, not just missiles. Anything short of that is optics. Yes, American forces are involved in the Middle East in defensive operations. And I think it's because they know they have to go back to Congress to get that congressional approval if they want to go to war with Iran directly. I also believe that it would be terrible for the Biden and Harris administration, with their vested interests in Iran, who gave them so much, who helped them so much, who armed them, who helped create and strengthen Hezbollah through their policies. It would be terrible optics for them to go to direct war with Iran right now. But then again, maybe that's what they want to do. Maybe that's what they need to do to stop Trump. Maybe they bypass Congress and they just order the military to do their will, which would be another unconstitutional overstretch of power, but it is not beyond American administrations to do exactly that. But short of that, we are still in the theater of optics. We are still in the midst of the proxy war. And what are Israel's war objectives? There's people in the streets. There's Palestinian flags. They're marching all over the place. They have this genocidal saying, from river to the sea. But like I say, there's two sides to every coin. The vast network of tunnels and deeply entrenched bases, I don't know what else you'd want to call them, bunkers, bases, where Hamas was operating from Gaza, were very real and existent. And Israel has used some incredibly powerful munitions to penetrate the ground and destroy them. Many civilians have died, children. It does appear that Israel has committed war crimes. There's way too many headshots of young Arab men to be accidental. But then you have to look at October 7th, and you have to look what played out there. You have to look at the atrocities that are played out by both sides. Look, if we want to go back in history, we can look at the time 20 years ago, before the separation wall was built, when suicide bombings occurred every week in Israel. They built the wall, and it worked, and miraculously, suicide bombing numbers went down to the ground. But those suicide bombers, they didn't care who they were killing. It was indiscriminate. War is hell. It's terrible. That's why we in the West, we in Canada, we should probably seek to just stay out of the world's conflicts, especially ones that are older than time itself, it seems. You want a symbol for how impossible the situation in the Middle East actually is? You need to look no further than the West Wall and the fact that the Dome of the Rock is built right on top of it. 500 yards either way. And it's a completely different situation, but no, they had to build it right on top of that. How is it? It's always fascinated me how the two of the most holiest sites in the entire world had to be built right on top of each other. Talk about creating problems. I think everybody should just take a breath. I don't believe, as of this hour, 2:15 p.m., that World War III has actually gotten started in earnest. There's a lot of things we need to see first. What Israel is trying to do is secure a generation of peace for their people and survival. And in no way am I justifying the horror that I'm seeing. But this is an attempt to completely annihilate Hezbollah. It was an attempt to completely annihilate Hamas, at least for a generation. And I don't think they're going to stop until they've done it, because they're moving now. The machine is in motion. It has to accomplish its objectives, because when it gets home, the Israeli public is going to punish the Netanyahu government massively. And I think that's the difference. There's a reckoning waiting for Netanyahu at home. There is no reckoning waiting for Hamas or Hezbollah among their own people. They are celebrated as heroes for every single Jew they kill. So there is a difference. But I'll just finish with that message again. Take it easy. What I've seen today is nothing more than the optics, the optical warfare, the theater that underpins the Iranian regime. Will Israel respond? Sure. But the last time, how long did they wait? How big of a response was it? Their rhetoric and what they did not match up, because all of this right now is being coordinated behind the scenes, because it is in nobody's interests to actually set off the Third World War. Now let's hope those collective interests can manage to navigate this and get us another 10 or 20 years of peace, so that we can sort out all the other problems that we have, which I've highlighted in several of my recent videos. Look, we got business to do here in Canada in order to right our ship. World War III would render all of that work irrelevant, because when nuclear weapons start flying, civilization ends. And all of a sudden, none of this matters. And the only thing that matters is your resilience and your own personal survival. Personally, that's not a place I want to go, and I have to believe, I have got to believe, that the leadership in this world, in the end, doesn't want to visit Armageddon on all of our heads. There are some lunatics in the United States administration right now, which I don't trust at all. I think they're so scared and so sociopathic and psychopathic. They're so scared of the consequences of their actions, if they're actually held accountable, that they might risk the entire world if there's a slim sliver of a chance to save their bacon. So I hope the restraint of the people they are trying to goad into World War III is enough to hold together until post-November, and I pray that the American people are smart enough to see through all the rhetoric and see through all the lies, to see through all the suppression polling and everything else that's going on, and give Donald Trump the presidency. Because that's the only shot we've got. He gets in there, everything changes. The politics of the world changes. The way Canada approaches the world changes. Everybody talks about the things that Pierre Poilievre says and the things that he doesn't say and the things that he does. And there's a lot of criticism right now because he wore the orange shirt and he did the whole thing yesterday. The man is playing a game. He's trying to win an election. But politicians are like weather vanes. The culture's changing. There's a shift in the mood. Look at what I should say. I'm going to save most of this for another video because I really want to get into it. Now that we're in October, this is the most important month in a very long time. The geopolitical seismicity of, let's even extend it, the next 7 weeks couldn't be understated. It's not just the U.S. election. The election in B.C. might be the most important election Canada's seen in a long time. The election right here in Saskatchewan is also very important. Mo came out today. Like I said, I don't want to get into this, but Mo came out today and proposed an income tax cut. And, the NDP is saying they're going to increase spending and they're going to cut taxes. And this is just, it's like it's all rhetoric for Main Street. What I care about is All right, that's it for this video. I'm going to get into that in the next one because I want to talk about Saskatchewan specifically, and I want to talk about the Canadian political situation in a separate video. If you want to support the work, go to my website. There's an audio-only version. Check it out, and I'll see you in the next one.